In just 5 weeks, global leaders will meet in Glasgow, Scotland for the crucial COP26 climate summit. The Biden administration is counting on Congress to pass 2 doctrine-defining bills ahead of that summit, legislation that would demonstrate the country's commitment to combating the climate crisis. But Democrats hold a slim majority in Congress, and it's not yet clear if the president's agenda will be successful. For more, let's bring in CBS News climate reporter Cara Korte. Cara, thanks for being here. Let's start with 2 bills up for debate. One tackles infrastructure. The other is a $3.5 trillion spending budget. In what ways are these intended to address climate crisis?
Well, let's start with the smaller infrastructure package, Lana. This is all about climate mitigation. Now, what that means is changing the way that things currently are to deal with the current problem. So we talk about climate resilience. What exactly does that mean? Well, in this infrastructure package, what the Biden administration wants to do is fix things like our buildings, like our energy grid, and make them more weather and climate resilient. Remember what happened earlier this year in Texas when a severe winter storm shut down most of that state's electrical grid. Those are the kinds of things that they want to prevent. In the bigger reconciliation package, what progressive Democrats are especially passionate about, that is where a lot of that climate-related legislation lies, and that is why progressives are so passionate about it. What they want to do with that package is climate adaptation. So it's about changing the way that we do things in this country to lower global emissions and global greenhouse gases. So what that includes are things like incentivizing people to buy electric vehicles. It means building more electric vehicle charging stations across the country, but it also means things like implementing something called a clean energy standard, which would pay utility companies to start using renewable energy, relying less on fossil fuels, renewable energy being wind, solar, hydropower, even nuclear energy. So that adaptation part of the reconciliation package is really about the future, and it's critical for the Biden administration because President Joe Biden has promised to have a fossil fuel-free electrical grid by the end of the decade. And so if these measures don't pass, he's going to have a hard time making good on that promise.
Why is that so important for the Biden administration? Why is the president so committed to coming out ahead on this issue?
It's really critical for a couple reasons. One, because we just went through the domestic goals that the president has stated. But on a global level, Lana, the United States is an important player in fixing this crisis. One, because the United States is historically the leading producer of fossil fuels, right? Our gas and oil industry that is unparalleled is responsible for a lot of the emissions that exist in the atmosphere. So experts I talk to say the United States needs to lead because the United States is largely responsible for the mess that we're in. So it's just kind of the integral thing to do. But the other thing is that the United States is a global superpower. And when the United States is at the table and taking things seriously, experts tell me that other countries fall in line. When you think back to the 2015 Paris Agreement, which then Secretary of State John Kerry, now climate envoy John Kerry, was a chief negotiator for on the United States, I heard stories from people who were in the room with him throughout that summit saying that John Kerry would be in meetings at 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning making sure that deals were getting done, and that leadership and that gravitas really matters. Something really interesting, Lana, a global survey came out earlier this week that surveyed people from 19 different countries all across the world, and of those 19 countries, the majority of respondents in 11 of those countries said the United States is not doing enough to lead, and that's what makes Glasgow, this COP26 summit later in November, so critical.
Well, let's talk about something that the co-founder of Global Optimism, a climate action organization, said. They described the U.S. as being, quote, one of 2 gorillas in the room. The other is China. Explain how the relationship between the U.S. and China has such an impact on our efforts at tackling this global problem.
Yeah, and the person who told me that, Lana, was Christiana Figueres, who was in charge of running the UN Climate Summit for many years, including 2015 when the historic Paris Agreement was signed. And she's been in all of these rooms at all of these tables breaking down what happens and why the United States is so important and why China is so critical as well. As we said, the United States is responsible for producing a lot of fossil fuels, and China is responsible for emitting the most carbon into the world. Right now, they're responsible for about 30% of the world's CO2 emissions. That is trouncing the next closest country, which is the United States, at 15%. And so when you have these two very powerful countries who are also responsible for much of this catastrophe, they need to take the biggest measures to make the biggest change in return. But it's also interesting, Lana, because the United States and China actually have the most to gain out of this transition as well. The United States came into a superpower kind of state of being in the 20th century, much because of our oil and gas production. It stimulated our economy so much. Well, what oil and gas was for the 20th century is what green manufacturing is going to be for the 21st century. And China already has a big lead on the United States in that arena. They produce a lot more of the raw materials that are used in lithium batteries and solar panels and wind turbines. The Chinese government is hell-bent on kind of winning this 21st century economy. So they find themselves, the China and U.S., in this very interesting position where they have to move, but they also want to do it in the most strategic way for both of their economies.
All right, Cara, thank you.
Thank you.